I inherited my grandfather's farm, along with one strange rule carved into the kitchen wall. I should have listened to it the very first night. I never knew my parents. They died before I was old enough to remember their faces. I grew up with my mother's parents, only ever hearing distant rumors about my father's side, a grandfather named Arnold I'd never once met. Days before I graduated college, a package arrived telling me Arnold had died in Oklahoma. He'd left me everything: a farmhouse, 2 barns, 85 acres. I called his lawyer, a man named Hartman, half expecting some kind of catch. There wasn't one. My grandfather hadn't farmed the land himself in years. He rented the acres to a neighbor for passive income, and that neighbor wanted to keep the same deal going with me. My college friends thought I was insane for actually moving out there. I didn't care. Most of them were headed back to their parents' basements, and I now owned a house on 85 acres of land. The drive to Oklahoma took most of a day and well into the night. By the time I turned onto the dirt road leading to the property, I hadn't passed another house in almost an hour. No streetlights, just my headlights swallowed by darkness a few feet ahead of the car. The farmhouse appeared at the end of that road, big, dark, and completely silent except for the deafening noise of insects surrounding it. A key and a note waited on the porch. "I'll be by in the morning," signed Hartman. The house itself was old but well kept, nicer furniture than I expected. When I got to the kitchen and flipped on the lights, I noticed something carved carefully into the wall, facing the fridge. "Keep your boots on, even in the house. Never go barefoot." I laughed it off, chalked it up to an old man's strange final message. Then I found a bedroom, didn't bother taking my shoes off, and passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, Hartman showed up in person to hand over the deed. He mentioned, almost in passing, that my grandfather had lost his leg in a farming accident years back and had spent his final years as an online lecturer, teaching, of all things, Oklahoma's local bugs and parasites. I showed him the message carved in the kitchen wall and asked if he knew what it meant. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Then he shrugged it off, told me it was probably just the ramblings of a dying man, and suggested I cover it up with paint. He left shortly after. I drove into town for supplies, and by mid-afternoon I was back home, arms full of grocery bags. I kicked off my shoes at the door out of pure habit. The floor felt wrong under my bare feet, warm, almost like standing on something alive. A strange, crawling sensation spread across the arches of my feet like hundreds of microscopic legs. I looked down expecting an insect. There was nothing there. The sensation faded into ordinary pins and needles, and I told myself it was nothing. I spent the evening on the couch, eating ramen, watching movies, and eventually fell asleep there. I woke before dawn to an itch unlike anything I'd ever felt, not on my skin, underneath it. I scratched with my hands, a towel, a hairbrush, anything. Nothing touched it. If anything, it spread from the arches of my feet to the pads to my toes until both feet were burning. I tried the shower for relief, and instead felt what could only be described as 1,000 tiny cuts opening across my feet. I screamed and jumped straight back out. The itching didn't stop until sunrise. I collapsed into bed and slept until mid-afternoon. When I woke, my feet were still itching, duller now, but constant. I examined them and found tiny raised bumps covering the skin like a rash. I touched one. Pain shot through my whole foot, sharp and electric, like plucking a string in a spider's web. I typed a description into an AI chatbot, half panicked. It told me to avoid scratching, keep the area clean, and see a doctor if things got worse. For a while, that was almost comforting. I told myself it was just some reaction to the countryside, something my city-raised body wasn't used to. That evening, the tingling spread into my ankles, then my calves. I tried to resist scratching. I'd sit on my hands, stare at the TV, promise myself I wouldn't touch it. Every time, I'd look down and find my own nails already dug into my skin. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the bumps on my feet had grown. Some were 4 or 5 times bigger than they'd been that morning, swollen and stretched tight like ripe tomatoes. I grabbed a pair of tweezers and sat on the edge of the bathtub, phone flashlight in hand. I pressed the tip against the largest bump on my right foot. It moved. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I touched it again. It moved the opposite direction this time. Something was alive under my skin. I pressed down harder, and the bump shot up my leg, past my ankle. past my knee, past my thigh, and slammed into my hip with a jolt of pain that dropped me straight to the floor, unconscious. When I came to, my legs were unrecognizable. My left leg was swollen to twice its size, covered in greenish-gray lumps. My right leg looked like an elephant's, black-tinged mounds the size of tennis balls, a wet squishing sound coming from inside them every time I moved. I dragged myself toward the stairs, lost my footing, and tumbled all the way down. At the bottom, sharp pain seized my right leg. I looked down in time to watch it convulse, then heard a loud, wet pop as one of the mounds burst, spraying hot pus across the floor. Where the bump had been was now a raw black hole. My whole leg looked like it had been attacked by woodpeckers, hole after hole covering the skin. Then I saw something moving inside one of them, thin, slick with blood, blind, writhing its way out into open air. Then another. Then more long, pitch-black worms pouring steadily out of my own leg. I managed to dial 911 before a worm crawled cold across the back of my hand, and everything went dark again. I woke up in a hospital bed and thrashed so hard they had to restrain me. When I calmed down, the doctor told me they'd removed a severe parasitic infestation, one that matched no known species on record. They'd had to amputate my right leg entirely to stop it from spreading. My left leg, they'd managed to save, if you could call it that. They'd shaved away layer after layer of flesh, stopping just short of the bone. I discharged myself a week later and never went back to that farm. I left everything behind. The sheriff can keep the property for all I care. I'm writing this now from a hotel room 3 states away. 2 days ago, I felt a tingle start in my right hand. Yesterday, the itching began. I have to stop writing every few sentences just to scratch it. The bumps haven't appeared yet, but I know they're coming. I've got a knife on the table beside me, and I'm sharpening it while I wait, because if it starts spreading up my arm the way it did my leg, I'm not calling for help this time.